The case that I have for you today is one that sent Pakistani authorities on the largest manhunt for Pakistan's most notorious serial killer. This is the story of a man whose only motive in life was to hear the cries of 100 mothers. This is the story of Javed Iqbal. Before we begin the case for today, we have a crazy announcement for all of you. Desi Crime, the book, is available now for pre-order on Amazon. Link is in the description. A labor of love and an attempt to do justice to the 20 very real stories featured in it, the book will take you through the mind-blowing criminal tapestry of South Asia. Go, click the link and get your hands on it today. We can't wait to see all of you with your own copies. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aishwarya.
And I'm Aryaan.
And the case that I have for you today is one that took Pakistan by storm.
Ash, this case is one that we covered, one of the first cases we ever covered on our audio podcast.
Right.
If you want to check it out, go to Spotify or wherever you listen in. But it's a case, the magnitude of which was just enormous.
Yeah, the scale at which the Pakistani authorities had to go to hunt down this man and the magnitude of evidence they captured is astronomical, unbelievable, and just horrifying.
Yeah, and before we start with the case and the amount of adjectives Aishwarya used, I could say that for our Patreon, which is unimaginable, astonishing. But anyway,
fantabulous.
We give amazingly fantabulous episodes twice a month, exclusive episodes on Patreon and YouTube members. So if you have money to spare and you want to support the Desi Studios, go become a patron or a member. And with that, on with the case for today.
So for this case, I'm taking you back to 1990s Pakistan. It's December 4th, 1999 in Lahore, and it's a beautiful, chilly morning. As the day is starting to progress, business is underway. Shops are starting to open, kids are on their way to school, and people are on their way to work. Khabar Naeem Hashmi, a newly appointed chief editor for a famous and respected Urdu newspaper in Lahore, and the son of a very famous Pakistani actor and poet, like everyone else, was also on his way to work. Hashmi reaches his office, work starts to pile up, and everybody gets busy for the day. From the office of the newspaper, one could almost hear the hustle and bustle of newly discovered headlines. Now, sometime this morning, shortly after everyone reached the office, there arrives a package for Hashmi. It's a letter, and newly appointed to a position of power, Hashmi knows that he's the one that's required to open it. Now, for the time, for 1999 to be specific, it wasn't unusual for newspaper editors to receive tips in the form of letters. And that's probably what Hashmi thought he was holding in his hand as he tried to read what was in it. But as soon as he glanced over the very first sentence of the letter, Hashmi fell, quote, sick to his stomach. He stood there in shock, holding in his hand a piece of paper that read, "I had sexually assaulted 100 children before killing them." This letter was written by a 44-year-old man named Javed Iqbal. Now, before we jump into the story of how the most notorious serial killer in all of Pakistani history was caught, I want to take you back 40 years to how the most notorious serial killer in all of Pakistani history was made. Javed Iqbal, the sixth of 8 children, was born in 1956 to a very wealthy family. His father, Muhammad Ali Mughal, was a successful trader in Lahore. He grew up in a loving home with loving parents and very many loving siblings. Accounts of his childhood make it very clear that he was an extremely pampered and spoiled child, given whatever he put a finger on. For example, in his early teens, Iqbal owned a 200cc motorbike, which he rode around town with his group of guy friends. And that's not even where his pampering ends. Eventually, Iqbal attends the Government Islamia College in Lahore, and while he's still a student, he starts a steel recasting business. And soon enough, Iqbal's father bought him 2 villas in Lahore where he moved in with his friends. However, as time started to pass by, Iqbal living with his guy friends stood out to people more and more. Now, it wasn't unusual to live with your friends per se, but it was who Iqbal referred to as his quote friends that stood out to people as odd. Iqbal, now a grown man, was living with boys much younger than him in age. When he was 25, for example, he would roam around with boys who were 15, 16 years old. Some of the family members recount how when they used to question him on this, Iqbal used to get extremely defensive of the boys and hated the interference.
Aishwarya, he sounds like the kind of guy, we all have this one guy in the society, you know, who hangs out with kids way below his age.
Right.
And that's his friend group, and he's always a little socially awkward. And, you know, you think of maybe separating him from the children, but they look like friends because they're all young. But something is weird about that equation.
And usually the reason is that it's a kind of person who can't really fit into a peer group of his own age, can't assert dominance in that group, can't make a mark for himself. And so he feels easy doing that in a group of younger people. But here to people, it seems a little bit more nefarious. Yeah. Eventually, to be able to get him to change his ways in typical Desi style, his family tried to arrange his marriage. Iqbal, however, hated the idea until one fine day he comes home and announces to everybody that he's finally selected a bride for himself, the elder sister of one of his guy friends. The marriage, which took place in 1983, lasted only for a couple of months. His second marriage was also to the youngest sister of one of his guy friends. That marriage didn't last either. One might think that he married two people in quick succession and then divorced them only to get his family off his back, but in reality, everybody thought that Iqbal was marrying them just to stay close to his male friends. Now twice divorced, Iqbal decided to start a new business. Eventually, he opened a video game store, the first of its kind in Shahadbagh. Do you know those tokens that you get every time you go to an arcade store? Iqbal started giving those out for free, but only to boys. While that might be a creepy detail in itself, it didn't stop at that. Many kids who visited the shop went back, quote, and told their parents horrific stories about what went on inside the shop. More than one kid came out to narrate a similar incident. Iqbal would throw a 100 rupee note on the floor and watch the boy who would pick it up. Then he would announce that this money had been stolen and that he had to search everybody in the shop. The thief would be caught and taken to an adjacent room. In that room, Iqbal punished the boys for stealing money that he had planted himself. In that room, he sexually assaulted boy after boy by sodomizing them. What went on inside the walls of that innocent-looking arcade was far beyond anybody's imagination. Naturally, when news slowly spread, people stopped their children from visiting the shop. Iqbal had no business left. So then, he went ahead and set up a fish aquarium and later a gym. And many people believed he did so only to attract boys again. He also set up an air-conditioned school called the Sunnyside School, but it failed because nobody was willing to send their children. An aquarium, a school, a gym, all these businesses seemed to cater especially to young people and more so boys. That's one of the reasons why people grew more and more suspicious of Iqbal. But people's suspicions didn't stop him. Soon after, he was charged with the assault of the son of a very respectable person in Shahadbagh. The matter was taken up by the elders of the area and he confessed to the crime too. But do you know what happened to that? He signed a stamp paper giving an undertaking that he wouldn't do it again. That was it. And believe it or not, Iqbal committed sexual assault again. But this time, he was finally sent to jail for 6 months. Right after he left prison though, his father passed away in 1993 and Iqbal received 3.5 million rupees from his father's estate. He used the money to construct a large house with a large pond in the basement, a swimming pool in the backyard, where he moved in with half a dozen boys. Iqbal loved moving around in style and was often seen driving a 5-door Pajero along with all of his male friends. Now, I don't think this needs to be stated, but homosexuality is severely looked down upon in Pakistan even today. And if it's taboo today, imagine what people thought back in 1999. The culture there, and in many South Asian countries for that matter, is strict about its stance against homosexuality, and even more so against pedophilia. But what you all may not know is that in places like the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, not far away from Lahore, such relationships, homosexual relationships between a man and his servant, his help, are a matter of pride or a symbol of social status. According to a 1997 survey conducted by Pakistan's National Coalition for Child Rights, there have been countless poems written in Pakistani literature about the love between a man and his help. And while not usually discussed openly, of course, the practice is generally understood and even accepted in some parts of the country. So Iqbal bringing in boys and then indulging in sexual relations with them, while was unacceptable to many around him, many also found it normal. But of course, nobody expected it to transition into what it did. Maybe now you're wondering that if this is a normal person in terms of how society looks upon him, he's rich, he's from a good background, a well-respected family, what went wrong with Javed Iqbal? By now the year is 1998, and this is where comes the turning point of Iqbal's story. In September of 1998, Iqbal was severely beaten up by one of the young boys he took in. He sustained severe head injuries and was unconscious in the Lahore General Hospital for 22 days. He had a fractured skull, a broken jaw, and countless broken bones in his body. For many days after he was admitted, the doctors had no idea whether or not he would survive. When many of his family members didn't agree to pay and many were unable to afford to pay for his treatment, his house, his car, his shop, everything he had ever owned was sold to get the money. Everything Iqbal once had was now gone in a flash. Once he was able to leave the hospital, Iqbal entered a world very, very different to the one he had left. He had nothing anymore. Both his parents were dead and all the riches he was so used to had been taken away. Iqbal had lost everything. The rich, spoiled kid with friends constantly around him and the money to start any venture he ever wanted, the boy who was gifted 2 villas at 22 and a 200cc bike at 18, now had nothing. This was not only a turning point in Iqbal's life, but also a turning point in Pakistan's criminal history. Pakistan was about to see something that no citizen could ever comprehend, even in the years to come. Children started going missing. Just 1 year after Iqbal's accident in 1999, children, little boys, all aged between 9 and 16, began to disappear from the streets of Lahore. Over 5 months, 25 missing cases were registered. All poor boys, young boys that had just vanished from the streets of Pakistan's busiest city. After this 5-month stint of boys going missing, the letter arrived. The letter Iqbal had sent to the newspaper editor. Quote, I had sexually assaulted 100 children before killing them. All the details of the murders are contained in the diary and the 32-page notebook that have been placed in the room and also been sent to the authorities. This is my confessional statement, end quote. The letter went on, talking about how most of the kids this man had killed were runaways and orphans living on the streets of Lahore. Once he killed them, he said, he dismembered their bodies, drowned them in vats of hydrochloric acid, and then dumped whatever was left in the local river. While the journalist stood in utter shock reading this gruesome letter, preparing to leave for the house mentioned in this letter, the same letter was received by Lahore police. Lahore police get the letter, read the letter, and rush to Javed's house. No, they crush the piece of paper and throw it without a second thought. Throw it away. This entire case brought to light the ineffectiveness of Pakistani authorities of the time and how their incompetence led this case reaching the ghastly point that it did. Social commentators in Pakistan have called this entire case a stinging indictment of the nation's public safety system, a system that has changed little since it was adopted nearly a century ago from the departing British colonists. In fact, of the 100 children who had vanished in the 5 months since Javed Iqbal's killing spree began, only 25 had been reported missing. As the mother of one of the young victims told Time magazine in December 1999 in an interview, quote, "It never even occurred to me to go to the police for help." So the authorities, having discarded the letter, now learn of the media receiving the same letter, and they learn that the media is on their way to the murderer's house. This is what compels the cops to finally retrieve this piece of paper and drive to the house mentioned on it. On reaching the residence, the cops and the media alike learn that the house belongs to a 44-year-old man named Javed Iqbal. But at that moment, that's the least of their concerns. If they thought the letter they received was horrific, the house they've just entered is far, far worse. Inside the house, there were blood stains all over the wall and the floors and numerous bloody footprints all over the property. There were pictures, so many pictures of all of Iqbal's victims, some as young as 9 years old. Pictures that were evidently snapped just moments before their deaths. In one corner of the house lay 5 plastic bags containing shoes. Around there were 85 pairs of shoes and heaps of children's clothes. If that's scary and that's sad, imagine this. Later, parents whose children were missing were made to search through these heaps of clothes and shoes in an attempt to identify their kids who probably fell prey to Iqbal. And honestly, I cannot imagine how excruciating it is to stand between 15 other parents to search for your kid's shoes when you know your kid is dead. They also found in this house the iron chain that Iqbal claimed he used to strangle the kids. Now, everything in this house, all these sorts of tokens that Iqbal had collected from his victims, they were all left neatly labelled by him. And the cops finally stumbled across the label they were dreading encountering. Near two foaming vats of hydrochloric acid that contained the bodies of what Iqbal claimed were almost 100 children, they found the label that said, quote, "The bodies in this house have deliberately not been disposed of so that the authorities will find them," end quote. According to The Guardian, in addition to the 2 barrels containing human remains, police also found several other containers of acid, as well as sleeping pills, bottles of oil, empty soft drinks, mineral water bottles, a number of children's board games, and some empty snake boxes. A broken video cassette titled Beast on Heat was also recovered. Now, Aryaan, do you have any idea what Beast on Heat is?
No.
It's this really eerie, creepy, unpopular indie film from 1977 about this insane German Nazi doctor who leaves these women in the company of this half man, half beast for them to be sexually assaulted and killed by them. It's absurd. And that's one of the cassettes they found in Javed Iqbal's home.
Aishwarya, I thought the house in the Kolkata House of Horrors episode we did was probably the most haunting crime / scenes to walk into.
Sure.
I completely forgot that this should be number 1.
100%.
This is unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And there was something about Partho Day's innocence that, if anything,
Ash,
you know,
this is right out of 7.
Yeah.
This is right 100%. Out of 7. I mean, if you haven't seen, guys, check out the film. Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman. One of the best films I've ever seen in this genre. But this is unbelievable.
I agree. I don't know why that cassette was found there. I don't know if Iqbal saw a reflection of himself in that or not. But that's not even the end of it. The walls of the entire house were recovered with handwritten posters. One of them read, quote, "Today, November 25th, 1999, I have decided to commit suicide. Yesterday, I killed my employee Sajid and incinerated his body in the container so that he could be punished for theft and for disturbing me again and again. Now I can go to sleep in the depths of the river Ravi," end quote. But if you think Javed Iqbal is dead, this story is far from over because Javed Iqbal was far from dead and the cops were far from done with him. Iqbal did try to drown himself, yes. However, after an unsuccessful attempt at suicide, Iqbal began his run from the cops, and this is when Pakistani police began their search for him. Now, I'm not entirely sure how the cops found out Iqbal wasn't dead, and I couldn't find any records that spoke of this. But soon after they began their search for him, they arrested 4 teenage boys who they believed were Iqbal's accomplices in his heinous crimes from a 3-bedroom flat in Sohawa that they shared with Iqbal. But within just a few days of their arrest, one of the 4 teenage boys died in police custody, allegedly by jumping from a window. But a post-mortem report showed that force had been used against him. Now, I just want to point this out that the use of force in police custody isn't as uncommon in Pakistan as it is in the West. So even though it was said that the boy jumped out of the window, the use of force wasn't and still isn't uncommon, and chances that the boy met a more sinister fate are possible. Javed Iqbal had left so much evidence for the cops. After that, Iqbal's own suicide attempt was a failure, and all 4 boys were finally caught by the cops. And I'm sure at one point, one of them thought that there was no way out of it, that they were caught. Now it's clear that Javed Iqbal, with his failed suicide attempt, had served himself up on a silver platter to the cops with labelled and protected evidence that Iqbal had left for the police, with a diary that had a detailed account of the murders, listing his victims' names, ages, and the dates of their deaths. In fact, in that diary, he also recorded the exact cost of disposing of each child. He said, and I quote, "In terms of expenses including the acid, it cost me 120 rupees to erase each victim," end quote. And not only did he do that, he gave all of the information up to the cops. But despite that, and despite having 4 of his accomplices in custody, the cops couldn't catch Iqbal for almost a month. This man, having killed and confessed to killing 100 kids, was on the road for almost 30 days. On the 30th of December 1999, Iqbal actually turned himself in though, on his own, but not to the police. He turned himself in at the office of the Urdu newspaper called the Daily Jung. He didn't go to the cops because he, quote, feared for his life and he was concerned that the police would kill him, end quote. The cops soon arrived to arrest him, and finally, after 30 long days of a cat and mouse chase, after 30 of the most excruciating and media-heavy search days on the part of Lahore police, Javed Iqbal was finally caught. The cops had him in the flesh, a 44-year-old, paternal-looking man with squared specs that rested on his wrinkled face, his black hair visibly getting greyer from old age.
Ash, at some point one might, of course, this is a gruesome serial killer, right?
Of course.
But one might consider that some amount of guilt or a semblance of a conscience got him to accept the crimes.
Yeah, no.
I have a feeling this is literally the Desi plot of Seven, where this man just wants the media limelight.
Absolutely.
If you wanted to kill yourself, you would have done that. If you were guilty for the actions, you failed suicide attempt, so to say. Post which, if you wanted to surrender, you could have surrendered instead of sending the note.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if you wanted the police to go on a chase.
Yep.
And even after the chase was complete and it was as big, the news became as big as it possibly could, you didn't turn yourself in at a prison. You turned yourself at a newspaper.
Right. 100%.
Again, so it's literally like Seven, where you want as much media attention to get your story out. So at no moment am I offering him any semblance of this serial killer having a conscience.
And even the way he's left the house, it's just so...
He's showing off.
It's so newspaper front page-ish to me,
Yeah.
It's so clicky almost.
Yeah.
It's so
clickbaity
horrible.
in a time where that didn't exist.
Exactly,
I
in the
agree.
most horrible meaning of the word. This old grey paternal-looking man, all of this made him look like an old relative of yours. So who the cops had in front of them wasn't the evil and cold genius they thought they'd find. They had a normal man, someone who could be your friend, your neighbor, maybe even your professor in college. But they knew by now that Javed Iqbal wasn't any of those things. By no means was Javed Iqbal a normal man. When the cops began questioning him, they couldn't believe the man that sat in front of them. A man with a long and problematic history with young boys and sexual assault and sodomy. And a man who was openly confessing his crimes without an ounce of remorse in his eyes or voice. In fact, this man, after already killing 100 kids, had the audacity to say that he could have just as easily killed 500 kids, but chose to stop at 100 because that was the pledge he had taken.
एक मिनट आपने 200 बच्चे क्यों नहीं कत्ल किए 100 क्यों इंतकामन कर रहे थे ना बिल्कुल इंतकामन कर रहे थे
मेरे पास आज भी इतने पैसे थे कि मैं ये सिलसिला जारी रख सकता था
कितने पैसे
अगर कल को आपने जो जितने मारे हैं उनमें से 3-4 बच्चे घरों को वापस आ गए फिर आपका सारा ये
कोई नहीं आएगा.
His pledge was to hear the cries of exactly 100 mothers. He said that he got young boys into his home only because he was extremely lonely and needed someone to help out with everyday chores. But then he went ahead and spoke of how some of the boys he got home were brutal opportunists who exploited him at every turn. In fact, he would later claim in his own confession to the police that it was an attack by some of the boys he had taken into his home that triggered his bloody killing spree. He told the cops that after this attack, his mother was so heartbroken at her son's condition that she passed away. Upon leaving the hospital, left with no friends, Iqbal became close to 4 boys. The 4 boys the police caught from Iqbal's apartment.
Again, Ash, I hate to do this in terms of trying to dissect a serial killer. One of the most evil serial killers we've probably ever covered on the podcast, trying to dissect why they did what they did, because it feels like you're justifying their actions, but I'm merely trying to prod and figure it out. So that's why there's this question of it. While there was evidence of homosexuality preceding that fateful attack he had, he never showed any signs of malevolence back then in terms of anything amounting to murder. There were reports of him sexually assaulting, but never murder. Could that attack have transformed him not just psychologically but quite literally his brain, where there was trauma suffered that just switched something on? We've heard of cases where brain injuries make you go from a normal person to, pedophilia. And
such a common theory in the O.J. Simpson case as well, that is NFL career and NFL players in general.
The CTE. There is proven cases that CTE has led to the incidence of murder committed murder by NFL players is highest
astronomically
among any sports
Correct.
players, and that's attributed to CTE. So could it have been some semblance of that?
We don't know for sure. It is the explanation that Iqbal puts forth himself.
Oh, wow.
And says that this is the event that triggered it. I was so unwell, I've lost my memory, I lost my mind.
Got
That
it.
is what he is saying. We know there was a pattern of behavior before that as well, even of assaulting young boys or fixation with young boys. Could this have been the trigger that pushed him over the edge? Absolutely. Is this the thing that transformed him from a law-abiding citizen to a criminal? Absolutely not.
Got it.
So now it was with the help of those 4 boys that he befriended right out of the hospital, that he went on his rampage to kill 100 children to avenge the death of his mother and the betrayal and loss that he faced at the hands of those, quote, street boys time and time again, end quote. While Iqbal was in jail awaiting his trial, a Pakistani-Canadian psychologist named Dr. Khalid Sohail travelled all the way to Pakistan to visit with Iqbal and interview him one last time. Because by now, everybody knew that Iqbal and his accomplices would get the death penalty for sure. Being a psychologist, Dr. Sohail looked forward to meeting Iqbal, and being a psychologist who now practiced in Canada, Dr. Sohail understood the role mental health played in Iqbal's psychopathy. And this is the thing about psychopathy. There weren't just 100 victims in Iqbal's story. In Iqbal's own mind, Iqbal was a victim too. In fact, Dr. Sohail knew that had Iqbal belonged to Canada, he would never have seen a jail cell, but only a mental institution. Eventually, Dr. Sohail also wrote a book about his interactions with him. Sitting in that jail cell, Iqbal tells Dr. Sohail his childhood story. The story of a kid who was told he was different, that he was God's child, and that he had a purpose on this planet. A self-proclaimed God person had told 5-year-old Iqbal and his parents that their boy was unlike any other, that he would heal the sick and help fix the world and do many great things. The God man even asked Iqbal's family to donate their son to God, whatever that means, but the family refused. For a long time after this incident, 5-year-old Iqbal kept going into states of trance again and again. After this incident, throughout the course of his life, Javed Iqbal continued to believe that he was the chosen one and that rules didn't apply to him the way they apply to the rest of the world. Now, whether or not this belief led him down a path of murder is for you, our listeners, to judge for themselves. But it's extremely interesting to note that superstitions of this nature and this level, what they do to the psychology of a common, normal man. Very soon after Dr. Sohail met Iqbal, Iqbal's trial started, and everything he had said previously changed. He claimed in the courts that he was innocent and that the entire affair was an elaborate plan to draw attention to the sad lives of runaway children from poor families. He insisted that the missing boys were still alive and challenged the police to find them. He claimed that some of the boys were now living with different people and were surely compulsive homosexuals, while others had returned to their original families, but their parents were hiding them from the cops. He claimed that his statements to the police originally were all made under duress. However, during Iqbal's trial, more than 100 witnesses testified against him, his pedophilic tendencies, and his past record of crime. The truckloads full of evidence that was gathered from his house that was left behind by him did not help his case. On exactly the 16th of March 2000, Iqbal and his 3 surviving accomplices were found guilty of the murder of 100 children. 2 of his accomplices, both 17 years old, were awarded life in prison, while Iqbal and his 20-year-old accomplice, to nobody's surprise, were awarded the death penalty. But it was a death penalty like Pakistan and most other countries in the world had never seen before. The verdict read, quote, "He is a Satan in the shape of a human being. In fact, he is a beast and such a cruel man that it is a disgrace to humanity to label him as human. The prosecution has fully succeeded in proving, and with the grace of God, I am fully convinced that the accused has committed first-degree murder of 100 children, and after cutting their dead bodies into pieces, have put the dead bodies into drums recovered from the house of Javed Iqbal, the accused. He should be strangulated with an iron chain, the weapon of offense in this case, in the presence of legal heirs of the deceased.
Wow.
And then his dead body should be cut into pieces, as it has been proved that he used to cut the dead bodies of children deceased in this case. The pieces of his dead body should be put into a drum containing the formula modus operandi used by the accused for the dissolving of the dead bodies. The sentence to be executed at an open place, preferably Minar-e Pakistan, in the presence of legal heirs of the deceased children, in order to make a horrible example." End quote.
My God, Aishwarya, that's the craziest
Verdict
verdict I've
I have
ever read in my life.
I know, and this was not normal. Even for Pakistan's history of verdicts, not normal at all. In fact, in all of Pakistan's history, the last time there was a public execution was when the country was under martial law by General Zia-ul-Haq in the 1980s. And moreover, it's commonly accepted in the legal systems of most countries that punishments can only ever be given to people who are alive. So asking for Iqbal's dead body to be cut up into pieces and put into acid was in many senses against the law and far, far beyond the jurisdiction of what the judge could allow. In fact, Pakistan's leading religious affairs body, the Islamic Ideology Council, declared the sentencing un-Islamic. But regardless of all of this, the sentencing was due to take place. Pakistan's most notorious serial killer was to be hanged publicly, chopped up into pieces and put into vats of hydrochloric acid in front of the families of the victims. It was now October 8th, 2000 when the guard outside Iqbal's jail cell fell asleep. When he woke up a few hours later, somewhere after midnight, he walked up to Iqbal's cell and found him and his 20-year-old accomplice hanging from the iron bars of the prison cell using their bedsheet. Now, this guard got scared. After all, he had fallen asleep on duty and it had led to 2 suicides. So he opened up the cells, untied the bed sheets from the necks, placed the bodies neatly on the floor in an attempt to make it look like the men were asleep. After that, he left the prison building without informing anybody. When the head warden of the prison woke up the next morning, he found dead the man who would go down in Pakistani history as its worst serial killer, as the man who killed 100 children only so he could hear 100 mothers cry. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.